It's good to brew, baby. What is up, YouTube? It's your boy Millsy. Back with Home Commander, back for another episode of Millsy Brews, the show where I take my first pass at the Commander's Force on a budget on my quest to brew the magic world. You know the motto, baby. It's ABB, always be brewing. That's what we're back to do today. That deck list is going to be down in the description for you below. I'd really appreciate it if you could interact with the video, like, comment, subscribe. Consider checking out those links in the description. I'd appreciate it. But today we're reaching back to a channel favorite, and by that I mean a deck I always love covering, and it's been a minute since we covered it the last time, so I thought we'd bring it back. Today we're talking about Captain Gathrod. A 5-mana Demir Horror Pirate. Does all horrors we control have menace? Whenever a horror we control deals combat damage to a player, that player mills that many cards. At the beginning of our end step, we can choose an artifact or creature card in an opponent's graveyard that was put there from their library this turn, and we can put it on the battlefield under our control. The game plan is pretty simple. Get our horrors out, deal damage to our opponents, make them mill through plenty of ways, and just try to get our opponent's things under our control. We've got some ways to interact with our own graveyard if we want to mill ourselves. We have some combos we could talk about, but again, the name of the game is mill our opponents and try to steal. I think the really important thing with Gathrod's ability is that the bottom thing doesn't care that the horrors are the thing that puts the cards there, and I think that's the thing that makes this commander have so much more upside, because we can do more traditional mill things versus just needing the horrors to deal the damage to our opponents. But I want to say a quick thank you to the channel members. Thank you so much for supporting the channel. If you're interested in seeing all of our videos early for just $1 a month, consider checking that out down below. Well, the truth is, some pretty fun horrors, and we get to do some interesting things. So we'll just kind of talk through some of the horrors. There are a few nightmares sprinkled in, and although they aren't horrors, they're still creatures that are going to take real advantage of what we're trying to do. As although they aren't horrors and won't trigger Gathrod, they're still very useful for us. So consuming Aberration is power on top is equal to the number of cards in our opponent's graveyard. So Aberration is going to get big, and whenever we cast a spell, each opponent reveals from the top until they hit a land and put those cards in their graveyard. So huge options to get even more mill, right, each turn on our opponents and get access to a better thing. Cruel Somnophage may be a nightmare, so it's not going to trigger Nagathrod's abilities, but the sorcerer can make somebody mill 4, and then its power and toughness is equal to the number of creature cards in all graveyards. So it should hopefully just grow and become a nice threat for just 2 mana. Defiler of Flesh has menace, has the Defiler ability from Diamond United, so we're going to be able to cast a black permanent spell for 2 life instead of one of its black pips. Remember, we cast a black permanent spell, a creature we control gets +1/+1 and menace. This is great, right? Because then that could potentially make that horror unblockable, depending on how many creatures our opponent have or what situation we're in, and might lead to a better chance of hitting somebody and getting them to mill. Hullbreaker Horror, a big 7-mana, 7/8 horror that whenever we cast a spell, we either return a spell we don't control to its owner's hand or return a non-land permanent to its owner's hand. Again, great ability to start bouncing our opponent's things, try to control that board a little bit. Hunted Horror comes in as a big 7/7 for 2 mana. Gives a opponent 2/3/3 Centaur tokens with protection from black. But again, you don't have to attack them. It becomes a nice threat to start attacking your opponents. Nemesis of Reason says whenever it attacks, the defending player mills 10 cards. So the Nemesis may not get in, but you're doing a great job milling your opponents for it. Night Howler and the Enchanted Creature both get +6/+6, or the Enchanted Creature get +6/+6 for X the number of creature cards on all graveyards. So you can either bring the Howler in another creature to give it a big buff, or just make it a big creature on your own. Overlord of the Flood Pits gives us a little bit of draw and discard every time it attacks, and again, it's a nice flyer in the air, which can hit our opponents. Of course, Roaming Throne is our favorite creature of every type, coming in and doubling up triggered abilities. Going to double both of Nagathrot's abilities, which is really nice, and any other abilities for our horrors that happen. Sakashima and Spark Double can both come in as a copy of anything, while effectively making them non-legendary. Sakashima does it by keeping its name as Sakashima the Imposter. Spark Double does it by just literally making a non-legendary version of it. Both of these are great for Nagathrod or anything else coming in and getting a key second copy of something. Sludge Monster, when it comes in or attacks, puts a slime counter on one other target creature. And then non-horror creatures with slime counters just lose all ability on base toughness 2/2. Really great to lock down somebody's commander or key creatures they need for value. And unlike removing somebody's commander, their commander just has to sit there with no abilities, and it's a 2/2. The Mind Skinner might be another example of a creature that isn't a horror, but I think does exactly what we want it to do. So if a Source Speed control would deal damage to an opponent, prevent that damage, and each opponent mills that many cards. The huge thing with the Mind Scanner is no. Nagathrod's first ability will get nullified by the Mind Scanner because we're not actually dealing damage. But I think the big difference and why the Mind Scanner is really worth it is, think about it. If I have a 5/5 horror that's going to hit an opponent, would you rather have that player mill 5 cards, or would you have each opponent mill 5 cards, right? That's a huge deal when you're trying to mill all your opponents out. And again, the Mind Skinner can't be blocked, so it might get in for 10, but you might have some more horrors get in for some even more and just mill a bunch of cards. Thing in the ice says this creature ends with 4 ice counters on it, where we cast instant sorcery, we get to take an ice counter off of it, and then when it flips over, it just returns all non-horror creatures back to their hands, hopefully, right, bouncing our opponent's things back and keeping all the horrors on the board for us. Toxrill is just a house of value, being if each end step you put a slime counter on each creature you don't control. Again, it kind of works nice with Sludge Monster if you can get them out at the same time. But you don't need Sludge Monster out because creatures we don't control get -1/-1 for each slime counter on it. So again, you're just going to start killing your opponent's creatures, and then when they die, you just get a slug for it, and we can sack slugs, draw a card. Again, Toxrill is great. It's going to start really decaying our opponent's boards and helping clear the way of blockers for our horrors. Uchalan is a star 4 with stars, number of crabs, oozes, or horrors we control. At the beginning of our end step, we can get rid of a creature from an opponent's graveyard. If we do, we make a copy of Uchalan. So we can get more of these. They're going to become real threats to our opponents. They get bigger and bigger. And then Zelix says whenever a player mills 1 or more creatures, we make a little horror token, and we can pay 1 and tap to have a player mill 3. But again, really nice way to start getting a board of horrors as well, right, to become more threats. But again, this isn't just horrors hit and mill. We're a mill deck, and I think we can really take advantage of it because, remember, Nagathra doesn't care why those cards hit the graveyard. So you have things like Fractured Sanity. To have each opponent mill 14. Glimpse the Unthinkable picks a player and has them mill 10. Pick the player you think has the best creatures, the best artifacts. Mill them for 10. Extract for Darkness has everybody mill 2, and we bring a creature from our graveyard back to the battlefield. Note that we can get a creature off those 2 milled because you do it after you mill, right? So you can get something key back. Maddening Cacophony. Each opponent mills 8 cards. If it's kicked, each opponent mills half their library, rounded up. Again, part of a combo we'll talk about in a little bit. Mind Grind. Everybody reveals from the top. Each opponent reveals from the top until they hit X land cards and puts all card revealed display into a graveyard. Next can't be 0. So the more mana you have, the worse that Mind Grind's going to get, having our opponents dig for those lands. Singularity Rupture, one of the new cards from Edge that makes this deck even better. A great board wipe. Destroy all creatures, then any number of players each mill half their library rounded down. So, not ideal with Nagathrod, right? Because you'd want Nagathrod out. But if you had enough mana, there's a world where you Singularity Rupture, then play Nagathron, and able to still get something back. But otherwise, you're just hurting your opponents, wiping the board and milling a bunch of cards. Alter the Brood says whenever another permanent comes into our control, each opponent mills a card. So again, nice, no matter what, it's going to get milled. Mind Crank, whenever an opponent loses life, that player mills that many cards. So again, not even just from our damage. Anything that causes them to lose life is going to mill them cards, them attacking each other, other spells, effects, and abilities. Riverturn Monument, tap any number of each players, each mill 2 cards. And then once per time Riverturn Monument's out, like if we were to blink it, you could use it again. You could tap it to have any number of players mill cards equal to the number of cards in their graveyard. Really good with anything like Maddening Cacophony that mills them half their library rounded up. Well, then you know that Riverturn could finish it out. Again, just another way to take advantage of all this mill that we're hurting our opponents with. The Water Crystal, of course, the other card we wanted to add to this deck. Whenever an opponent would mill one or more cards, they mill that many +4 instead. Turns every horror hit into just even better for us, right? Milling more and more cards. Quarter cutting. Everybody's we have each of our opponents mill 2 if we want to, and then if we're the Monarch, they mill 10 instead. But again, the point is you're getting that mill every turn, putting at least some cards in the graveyard, right, for Nagathrod to look at. Psychic Corrosion, where we draw a card, each opponent puts the top 2 cards of their library into the graveyard, so everybody mills 2. The important thing to note about these abilities, right, is that because, again, Nagathra doesn't care about why the cards hit their graveyard. These cards become so important that if you let's say there's a turn where you can't get a horror in for damage, you might still be able to get, each of your opponents to mill 3, 4, 5 cards, and you still have something to pick from, right? Which is a huge deal in the grand scheme of things. So how can we care about the graveyard? Either our opponent's graveyards or our graveyard, right? Well, it's something like Breach the Multiverse. Everybody mills 10, and then we get to pick a creature planeswalker from everybody's graveyard back underneath our control. Sonic Ritual says we could exile a target instant or sorcery from an opponent's graveyard and from anyone's graveyard and copy it. We choose to, choose to copy. We could cast the copy without paying its mana cost. But if we tap an untapped horror, we can do it multiple times, which is really interesting. It's just a really interesting spell, and depending on how deep our opponent's graveyards are, you can just start copying a bunch of instant sorcery, getting a bunch of value. Reanimate can just get things back out of our graveyard or an opponent's graveyard. Note that Reanimate doesn't say your graveyard, it says anyone's graveyard, getting some key things back. Memory Plunder can go cast an instant or sorcery out of an opponent's graveyard without paying its mana cost. Blood Chief Ascension gets a counter on it at the beginning of each end step if an opponent lost 2 or more life this turn. And then as soon as it gets to 3 counters, anytime a card hits an opponent's graveyard from anywhere, we can have them lose 2 and we gain 2. Again, great if you can get the Ascension and set up and then start milling them. You'll probably just kill them with the Ascension life loss before they actually mill, but that's good. That means less cards, right, that we have to mill. If you think about it, it would be at an average commander table, that's 20 instead of the 100, right? And you can start to see why that's really beneficial. And then Porch of Carfell, letting us mill for and returning a creature from our graveyard back to the battlefield tapped if we want to sack it to get some value. Well, all right, we got a couple combo options in the deck. So the first one here isn't truly infinite. It has a chance to go infinite because realistically it probably will, but it does require a little bit of luck. So Eater of the Dead is a big horror that says we could pay 0, and if it's tapped, exile target creature card from a graveyard to untap it. We're going, that's odd. Why would you want to untap Eater of the Dead? Well, it's because we have a card like Phoenix, which works so well with our deck, but also works so well with Eater of the Dead. Phoenix says that creatures we control have the ability to tap and have target player mill X cards from their library, where X is its toughness, right? This is great with the rest of our deck. Then our horrors don't even have to hit our opponents, right? They can really just start milling out our opponents. Although we want the damage, it's okay if we can't get the damage in. But with Eater of the Dead, now it taps for 4, mills somebody for 4, and as long as it hits a creature, it can untap and tap again. Now, this isn't truly infinite, right? Because you, 1, can't guarantee that opponent's always going to have a creature in their graveyard, and 2, can be responded to, right? So there's a bunch of examples where someone might be able to respond to this, but if no one does, and we hit enough creatures, we should be able to mill our entire opponent's libraries out, all 3 of them, and win the game that way. There's also the quick and dirty mill combo, right? We talked about Madding Cacophony. If you kick it, each opponent mills half their library rounded up. Well, if we pair with something like Brewvac that doubles the amount somebody would mill, well, there we go. Our opponents mill out completely. I think the point with Madding Cacophony is it's just going to be brutal for your opponents no matter what. It chunks out most of their library, and you could still find ways to, tack onto it things like Water Crystal. It's still a great card, but of course, if we can get it with Brewvac, it just gets worse and worse, right? Milling more and more. Again, you very rarely will see both of these at the same time. Both of these are great pieces of our deck, and Brewvac's just great all the time. But again, if you could see them both, you could just mill all your opponents out straight up. But I've said it before on the show, and I'll say it again. No deck's ever complete, although it's been a while since we looked at Nagathra the last time. Still don't think the deck's perfect. And going into testing, I love the idea of things like Arcane Adaptation in the Leyline to try to just turn all of our creatures into horrors. My thought there is then that every creature in our deck can be a threat, right, to mill our opponents out. Although I think as you've seen, we've proven we don't necessarily have to. We could just do enough mill. But I think there's a world where maybe we think about always having horrors that can, do things like that. There are also other cards from Nagathra's Precon that care about horrors that we could take advantage of. The other thought is something like Virtue of Persistence. So on its enchantment side, you can just bring a creature from a graveyard back to under our control, beginning of each of our upkeeps, which is a huge deal, especially the deeper, right, we go into people's decks, right, as we're milling them out and taking advantage of all those cards that we're milling. But let's do what we love to do on the channel the most and get into our playtest. Remember, the goal of playtests on our channel is not to find Magical Christmas Land. It's not to show off all our best plays, but it's to get in some gameplay scenarios and kind of understand what we're looking for and how we're going to set up our game plan. Here we've got a 4-lander with Dark Ritual, always great, gives us added mana. could be a turn 3, right, Captain, which is always great. We have Jador, the new land from Final Fantasy. Again, can be a land, but for 6 mana, we can have an opponent mill half their library rounded down. Their Sludge Monster, Drown on the Lock's always fun. Drown on the Lock's always a really interesting card because it cares about the controller of the spell's graveyard. So you can either counter a spell if it's less than or equal to the number of cards with the graveyard, or destroy a creature with mana value less than or equal to the number of cards in their graveyard. So again, the more you mill out an opponent, right, the better. So again, this is only 4 with the Dark Ritual, so we're just 1 off Nagathrod. We could get Uchlan down if we want to, but I think it makes more sense just to wait and get down Nagathrod here, basically because it helps us so much, and it's going to be such a great piece on the board for us. Now I think it would make more sense to play the Uchlan, but we can't because we have 2 basic lands that would come in tapped. My thought is get the Aqueduct in, tap the black before you do, and then just play something like the Hall Creeper. It is a horror. Remember, whenever it hits a player, you choose one that hasn't been chosen and it can't be blocked. Again, we'll just want to get something down that isn't Nagathrod to make it copy before it has to. But again, should be pretty easy with the the Uchlan or the Sludge Monster. Sludge Monster is another key thing it could copy, really helping us lock down our opponent's things. Last turn, we could have had Captain hit somebody, and if it did, maybe we got something back out of our opponent's graveyards. Basically, for the purpose of this playtest, I'm not going to look to care about what's our opponent's graveyards at all. There's no way for us to simulate that, but just note that we would be picking something and bringing it back, right? That's the other reason to think about putting in the Arcane adaptation, and that is we could turn all of our opponent's things we got back into horrors, right? And then they can help us out. But I think it's Uchlan, right? We have a good chance at Captain hitting. The Silence going to hit no matter what. Maybe we can mill a couple of things and get a creature in opponent's graveyards to make a copy of it. We'll have the Hall Creeper get a couple counters. And then let's say we did, have a creature card for the Uchlan to get so we can have a copy of it. Again, we're running into a world where Hall Creeper is going to have it be copy something with the Jadoran tap, play the Blood Chief Ascension. Again, we should have the ability to get at least a counter on it and hopefully start getting some more on it. We do that. I only have 4 mana left, so I think I just glimpse somebody to have a mill good. Again, get into combat, have the Hall Creeper attack. Uchlan's a 4/4 right now. Again, we can wait. We don't necessarily need it to attack, but it has a menace, so there is a world where potentially it does get in. Then I'd probably just have the Hall Creeper become a copy of Uchlan. We can have it draw a card and get another round of attacking, but truthfully, Uchlan's just such a great card, and it's just going to continue to grow. Right now, it's basically a 6/4, right? Because it has that buff. And remember, Uchlan's ability stacks, so each of them is going to be able to exile a creature, right, to make another copy of them. Again, maybe we get something back, exile a couple creatures. The Ascension should get a counter. Again, we hope it gets counters before it comes back to our turn. We're going to assume it doesn't. We're going to have to do it the old-fashioned way. Of course, Uchlan works really well with Umbrus because Umbrus gets a buff for each card in exile, but also says whenever it or another nightmare enters the battlefield under our control, target opponent exiles cards on the top until they hit a land. So now we're going to put more things into exile. Pseudo mill, right? Because they still get rid of the cards. But now Umbrus is going to grow, right? We have 5 copies of Uchlan that are all, 7/5s, 7/4s, right? Because of their ability. Hall Creeper gets to be a 9/6, right? Because of its counters. All of them have menace, get them in attacking. The Ascension is going to go off. Again, maybe we can exile a card or two, especially with that Unthinkable, to get a couple more Uchlans. Worst case, we've just taken over this board, and once the Ascension's online, our opponents are just in real trouble, right? Because they're going to be milling cards when our horrors hit, dealing a ton of damage with the Ascension. Think about it. If any of these Uchlans hit being 10/4s, that's 10 cards, 20 life, right? So you could start to see where the Ascension being online is really going to help us out and become really brutal. And then as these horrors enter, right, Umbrus is going off, putting more things into exile. Again, Umbrus is the only thing that gets the buff for the exile, but we really don't care. If you think about it, that's just more cards, less cards we have to mill, right, on our long way to really taking care of our opponents. Let's get into playtest number 2 here. Keep it a 4-lander with an offer you can't refuse. There's Heartbreaker Horror, and then there's the Rupture. Again, we do have 5 mana because of the Aqueduct. It's just a little awkward because you have to bounce one back to do it. But there you go. There's the Altar of the Brood. Going to really help whenever another permanent comes in. Each opponent mills one. So land in, everybody mills one. And then we can get the Hunted Horror in here, which is pretty nice, right? Now we can start attacking if we wanted to. Turn 3, Shipwreck Marsh. I was going to say, or do we turn 3, the Aqueduct, so that we can get in? It's still awkward. So we're still going to have to wait a turn, aren't we? Because next turn we would put this down, and then we would need another turn, right? Even if we put this one down this turn, we're still in the same spot. So I think it's Shipwreck Marsh. Everybody mills one. I'll just play the Night Howler. Ooh, don't want to play it just quite yet. Right, because it might have a chance to die. I guess if somebody's milled a creature already with the Altar of the Brood, we just slam this in, right? Because it just gets even better. People mill a card again. But if no one slammed a creature, let's not. Let's just say there's a creature in a yard, because I have a feeling 2 cards milled already with the Brood. 3, actually. I think there's a hot chance that somebody's hit a creature already. That's 12 cards, right? Howler comes in, everybody mills again, so Howler has a chance to be getting kind of big. Come to our turn, we can tap that Shipwreck before we bounce it back just to get the Herald's Horn. But again, here, bounce back, mill a card, Herald's Horn, mill a card, calling Horrors. So now our Horrors are a little bit cheaper. And again, now these guys are starting to grow. Again, no reason to damage quite yet with the Horror, but it could. I mean, it's a 7/7. If we can get the free attacks, we want it to. Now as we come to our turn, sorry, that would have got revealed to us from the Horn, and it isn't a Horror, so it goes to our hand. Here, mill a card, the Gathrod, mill a card. And the nice thing is we can leave up that blue because only 4 mana because of the Herald's Horn, which is great because then you can leave up this offer you can't refuse. Now we want to take the attacks with Horror if we have it. Have Night Howler get in. It now has Menace, and it's probably decent sized because of all the things we've milled so far. Again, end step, get something if you can. Otherwise, we should have plenty of mill this turn. 2 at least on just our permanents, and then probably some on these guys hitting in. Horn goes off, not a Horror, but it goes into our hand. And not a bad card. Each opponent milling 14 is particularly brutal, right? Having everybody mill 14 and then still getting into attacks could make a huge difference, right? And just lead up to something big. Otherwise, that's just a bunch of mill we've gotten in our opponents. Our things hit. Hopefully get something back, and we still get to leave up an offer you can't refuse mana. And note that if somebody wipes the board, we just Singularity Rupture. Wait for the board to rebuild a little bit, Singularity Rupture. Everybody mills, destroy all things. Like, we have a really nice counterplay here in that sense. Okay, so we did run into one of the interesting things in this deck is there is a combo with Hullbreaker Horror and Sol Ring. So, to my knowledge, the way this works, we need one more thing, right? Because Hullbreaker Horror cast the Sol Ring. In response to the Sol Ring cast, that's when we would bounce something. We have it. We have Altar the Brood. So we would get the Horror in. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And then it's reduced by 1 because of the Herald's Horn. So we're just 1 off. Because what you can do is play the Sol Ring, bounce this Brood back to your hand, tap the Sol Ring, play the Brood, Sol Ring back to your hand, and you've still got the 1 mana, and you can replay the Sol Ring. You will get the mill from the Brood, right? When you cast and the Sol Ring comes in. Well, it is on cast that you return. I know I can bounce everything my opponents control back with the Hullbreaker Horror besides their lands, but the question is, does this get me anywhere as far as milling, or is this just a fun loop? Right? Because when I cast the Sol Ring, I'm bringing the altar back, right? So it's not seeing this Sol Ring enter. And when I cast this Altar of the Brood, I'm bringing this back. So I don't think they're ever seeing each other, but I can bounce literally everything my opponents control back to their hand. And then all I need to do is cast something else to bring the Sol Ring back to my hand and do it again, right? So that's an interesting little combo you have access to as well. It's not as, I guess it's not as flashy in the sense that it doesn't end the game. It just bounces all your opponent's things back, which I think is still equally brutal and something to note that you do have in the deck as well. Let's get into playtest number 3 here. Keeping a 3-lander with Sol Ring, Thought Vessel, and that beautiful Water Crystal, and we do have some counterplay in the counterspell, but I think we'll just go right. Soul Ring into Thought Vessel. And then we're just an untapped blue, right, away from a turn 2 Nagathrod, which we'll happily take. Turn 3, play the Marsh. I think we get the Water Crystal down, right? Still got 2 mana left. Unfortunately, it won't be double blue for the counterspell. I think we just hit somebody with the captain, and they're going to mill 7 instead of 4. Maybe we can get something nice back that way. Here we could extract if we want to. Everybody mill 2 and bring something back. Everybody will mill 6, right? Sorry, our opponents will mill 6. We will mill 2 and potentially get something key back. Then we could hold up something like Reality Shift. We could just Arenikis' Vile Duplication on Nagathrod and make a copy of it, which would give us double mills on horrors hitting and double mills or double things back, which is particularly great, right? I think we're in a good shape from here. We're getting some key things back. Graz is pretty fun. If something gets blocked, we can bounce it back to our hand. I think this is probably the extract turn. Again, we see Zelix, but I'm sure opponents are going to see things even better. Otherwise, Zelix is great because whenever your opponents mill things, you're just getting value. And then again, the captain's attack, they're both going to cause people to mill. So basically, one of the Nagathrods hitting for 3 is going to cause someone to mill 7 and then 7 because of the Water Crystal. You can start to see where this just gets really fun. I think we're pretty much good to stop here. Someone's got to get rid of specifically Nagathrod. And the problem with that is then you still got the Water Crystal. Somebody really has to just farewell the board at this point to stop us from this just going off. And as they're milling, we're getting these horrors that then can attack on future turns, right? Milling for 10 because of the Water Crystal and the 2 Nagathrods, and we're just off to the races. But let's go for one more playtest. Again, a little bit quicker on that one. But again, it goes to show you that with the right pieces, right? 5-lander, we see Cruel Somnophage. Again, mill on the sorcery side, and then it can grow on the other side. And then Endless Evil. So the beginning of your upkeep, you make a copy of the enchanted creature, except it's a 1/1. And then whenever it dies, if it was a horror, return it back to our hand. So an interesting card. Works really well on something like Toxrill. But the problem is that Toxrill's legendary, right? So not as ideal. But you really want something that's non-legendary but has a really key ability. So we'll just get something like the Fetid Pools in. Crippling Fear is pretty great. Can give our opponents some hell on the -2, -3 for anything that's not a horror. Just have somebody mill 4 on the adventure side. Again, can't get any profit from it, but could still have some fun. Maybe you hit enough creatures to bring the Somnophage back this turn, right? Or you could just go for the Cacophony if you want to. But again, we can't kick it, so it doesn't seem ideal. I think there should be at least a creature enough to the point that you want to go for the Somnophage. Here for 4 mana, you have the Crippling Fear. We're not quite there on that yet. I mean, we could Endless Evil the Somnophage, but the problem is it overwrites its power and toughness ability, so that's not really ideal. I think we're just looking to come for, Nagathrod this turn again. Somnophage isn't a horror, so it's not going to mill off of Nagathrod, but that's fine. Here, I really like Sakashima, again, as a copy of Nagathrod. 2 of them get really brutal at the same time. And then, have it attack, mill. You get 2 copies of bringing things back. Now at 7, do you have your choice? Or 6, we could have gone for the Cacophony. But now at 7, do you have your choice? Do you want a Cacophony here, or do you want to just Toxrill? Just try to just lock the board in. Cacophony feels particularly brutal. Just having each of their opponents mill half their library rounded up, and we just get the pick of the litter on stuff from their graveyard. Toxrill, I think, is equally brutal as well. But I think Cacophony is probably the play. You just get your pick of things from somebody's graveyards. Somnophage becomes just huge. Potentially could hit somebody in pretty hard. And then here, you could go Crippling Fear plus the Court of Cunning and just set up a house of value. Lock your opponent's creatures in, hopefully, and just get more mill. Or just play Toxrill. Again, force your opponent's things into the ground as you... continue to mill your opponents out. Again, another great playtest. Truthfully, Nagathrod's one of those decks I've kind of always wanted to come back to for myself. It's a deck I've always liked. I've never really considered playing mill, but I think this is one of the decks that could make it pretty fun, mixing a fun creature type into horrors. And then mill, we continue to see, again, Water Crystal, River Churn Monument, Singulated Rupture, just these fun pieces of mill that I think just could make a deck like this fun. So I'm thinking about maybe just messing around with this deck for myself and see if I can make it into something I like. And if I do, we'll update it for the channel. But I'd love to know what you think of Nigath Rod down in the comment section below, and I will catch you all in the next one.